had our motto with the road to Agile. And yesterday, I was talking like just a little about just leading, not leadership. Because from my point of view, I'm leading here the attention, or like people, like 230 people that we actually have here. But can I be sure as a moderator here, just because I'm on stage, I have a loud voice and I'm a little bit crazy in the head, that you like will follow my lead? Sorry? A little bit crazy, yeah? No, no, no. It's just your point of view, okay? Keep it. Well, there's one quote that I think if you do a moderation that works perfectly good. Seeing you're a leader doesn't make you a leader. Leading makes you a leader. Because if you just go there and say like, okay, stand up, jump, clap, and sing and dance. What's the matter with you?
You've got 2 chances.
Yeah, I know. I know you can do it, so there's the stage. Why are you not doing it?
You're not a leader.
Thank you very much. Leading always has to do something for me personally with some, let's say, freedom. So there are some boundaries to it, but you can learn. For example, yesterday, the same thing like today. I was leading actually something you towards each other. Yesterday it was like, I think how you are. Today it was a different question. What was the best thing, yeah? The other thing is it was a magic trick. I was leading your attention. It can be like difficult and depends on the context because actually I was misleading you for fun. Yeah? So if you put it in this way, you can be like, So it's better you call it a magic trick, but you don't let the people like see you behind what you're doing. But 230 people is one thing. But if you're leading one person, well, there are different ways to do that. Okay, that was the wrong button. I spelled your name wrong. Yeah, I do this all the time. Now I show you an example of bad leadership. Yeah, but there, I was pretty sure that he was coming onto stage. The thing with Chris now is there will be now an experiment on leadership. Please stay here. No, I still need you. Your job is not over. What did I tell you about this moment exactly?
That you told me nothing. Just, I will need you for the moderation, but I don't know what's going to happen.
True, and I asked you if you help me, right?
True. True.
So that's all the thing he knows about. So he knows that there's something happening here, but he don't know very much. So could you please stand in front of each other? And I want to explain you how leadership works in my perspective on a single person. But I will use something that I know and I know he knows, but he doesn't know yet what I know that he knows, or something like that. Concentrate on me. Yeah, my lessons were later, yeah? Sorry. Yes, your job is still not done. So. No. Ah, okay. Try. So, what happened here? Okay, you all noticed that it was dancing, right? So, if you could join me here, if you would like. What happened here? Well, I have the knowledge of him that he is a dancer. You are actually dancing professionally, right?
Not anymore, but yes.
Not anymore, but you got experience. So, the first thing that I did for the connection was even if it's okay for him to help me. That was the question. If he said no, it wouldn't have happened. Two people in the room before I asked that if I can ask them like publicly if they want to share what was their best experience yesterday, but being on stage is kind of a pressure where not normally people say yes. In this case, I had the idea to show like in dancing, we are dependingly very, very heavily on the connection. But if I asked for the connection, you knew,
I responded.
Not even you responded. You were like keeping the connection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In dancing, well, it's very clear. You have a leading part and you have a following part. So the following just does following. That's everything. I think your job is done here. Cool. Thank you very much. Christoph, thank you very much for helping me. And then there comes the point in dancing where as a leader you realize sometimes it makes sense that you get into the following position. For example, if you're dancing backwards and there's a couple behind, well, yes, who takes the following part? Sorry, who takes the leading part? The follower switches, like, you can feel it, like, they're like, whoa, okay, now it's dangerous, and you feel, okay, and you give up your leader. I wouldn't say leadership, but it's clear in the moment that the other one is leading. But all you do actually as a good leader on the dance floor, you take care of the connection. I knew what he was capable of. Of course, I could have led like figures. It would be like funny for me and you and all of them, but I didn't do that. So if I, for example, would dance with you like salsa or souk, well, it looked be maybe a bit more romantic and very, very like interesting. Yeah, be glad that I didn't do that. So what happens, like what works in dancing, for me also works with a crowd, works with one people or like 12 people in a training, because it's about the connection. Why? For me, it's a mystery. It's magic. But I can dig deeper, and then like the stardust will fall off. But we're here also to learn a little bit something. I told you what I do on stage is, and also in my trainings, to lead an audience in an entertaining and informative way. For example, yesterday, I read the whole sponsors. That's what we are kind of grateful for. We are grateful that people sponsor our conference, but I have the possibility to do it in a different way. Well, it's unusual. Did I knew that it will work? This year I was pretty sure. Last year it was a real big experiment, and the people who know me, it was just spontaneous. Because I was standing here on stage and I was like, I have now the possibility right now to read it down or to do a rap. Maybe it depends a bit on your personality. But what you learn is which things work better and which things don't work that good. So even here on stage, I wouldn't say like I'm agile, but it's heavily depending on your experience. With Chris, I just had to make sure I had to think of, want to do this exercise on stage. Who do I choose? For example, if we would take Wolfgang, yeah? No, right? No. Even if you're like an experienced speaker, even if you know how to be on stage, yeah? I know I can like maybe make a little bit fun of you, even if it's not too much, that's fine. It wouldn't have worked. Because in this case, me and Chris, we share the same knowledge or the same language. And this we trained intuitively. And I think it's the same thing with leading and following. A lot of things with leading and following and people, you just need to learn. And the only thing that comes to my mind when I'm like on stage or in a training is, I try to take care of you. Try. It's a big experiment, but with experience, you can have like better and better experiments. So I'm grateful for your attention. Like yesterday I was misleading you in a magic trick. And why are people doing this? Well, leading is not the same leading is not the same as being the leader. Being the leader means you hold the highest rank either by earning good fortune, navigating internal politics. Well, in my case it was nothing else like standing here on stage, having a microphone. But yesterday, something different happened. Didi, may I ask you, like, just make a role play with me? Maybe this is more comfortable. I think yesterday you were standing there, right?
Yeah, I think it was on this side.
On this side, yeah? No, you were standing.
I was standing.
You were standing. You had the microphone, but this time I keep it. Well, we know us a little bit, so I know I asked him like if you want to be like more on stage or like down on earth, and he's like, yeah, he want to be like on the level of the people. He doesn't want to be out there. So to make you higher, actually, I needed to sit down.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good intervention.
And here you took the leading part.
Yeah.
I had no clue what you were saying. Just trusting you did a good job. Just one other example. Thank you. I know you're nervous, but thank you for helping me. So if you think of leading, maybe next time you think about the connection. Because without connection, people won't follow you. And they actually can say, no, I don't like it. Yeah, thank you. So yes, if there's a connection between people, maybe this like, I don't know, emerged from the mingle last year, it works. But if you like pulling too fast, the connection is gone. And what are you doing then? And before the connection here, like I stretch it too far, it's time again for our sponsors, please, to come on stage. So everybody who is like on this image, please come up on stage. Please give them a warm welcome, like our sponsors. Without, we couldn't have done our conference. Please, Wirecard, E-Punkt, Agile Experts, Netconomy, Chamber of Commerce, Raiffeisen Bank, Corporate Culture Jam. Don't be shy, you have me. Thank you very much. And this time I give you a little bit different time box. So the time box is 2 to 3 sentences. Go!
Very nice to be the first one, to have 2 or 3 sentences. Warm welcome for today. Hope you have a good second day today. My company is Embark. I talked to you yesterday. If you were interested, it's okay. If not, I hope something else tingles you.
Okay, so I'll be outside as well. I'm from Netconomy, and if you have any questions or want to learn more about us, just contact me.
So, we are from the event bird, and if you would like to go in touch, because you do also an awesome conference and you need some support, just come to us and talk with us.
Yeah, and therefore, thank you for a great conference and being here. And yeah, thank you.
Since I had the chance to talk yesterday, I want to advertise the Coaches Clinic, which is still not used as much as it could. Thank you.
Okay, on my way up to the stage, I had a little conversation with Manuela, which rule she should choose. She decided to have this event bird rule. So my role is representing Freiräume, another conference here in Graz. Maybe one or the other of you know it already. It's about self-organization, it's about wholeness, it's about purpose. So high degree of same mindset. And yeah, we are very glad that we have this cooperation with Agile Austria for the 3rd time in a row. So have a good day. on day 2.
So I'm from Weisbach, Sauermacher, and I'm very grateful to be here and to have the possibility to join this great community, and that I'm very proud that my company sponsors a little bit. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we are Collabri, and we are your Atlassian partner in Styria. And if you are tired to manage your Atlassian stack in-house, yes, then please come to us. We'll do that for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your words. Thank you very much for sponsoring our conference. There was one statement very interesting. Somebody was actually referring to somebody else and tried to use the time here to help others. It's always a good sign. So thank you for helping Didi. Like, we have a coaches clinic. Still open today. And yes, of course, it's not usual. Sometimes you have some, I have some normal resistance against it. But when I was a young Scrum Master the first time, yeah, long time ago, I think like 1 year. And 1 year, yeah. I'm just talking, you know. I'm not the best coach in the world or something. I just love to talk. That's why I'm here. You okay? Thank you. Yeah, okay. And there comes maybe the point, like if you see yourself as an agile coach or something, that doesn't work with the team. You know, they're all nice people. They're all trying their best, but like yourself, like, doesn't work. I have no clue. Maybe I want to quit my job. What do? And then you're reminded, well, I need to find a better way, sometimes just for myself. And what I did was supervision. And I went there like a little bit cocky, like, yeah, I know, no, not really know what's the problem or them. But the enlightenment that I got off this coaches clinic was very, very simple. Maybe it's not them that's wrong, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the wrong Scrum Master for that team. And the good thing about this, it took all the pressure and suddenly the team was progressing, at least a little bit. Okay, we want to remind you we still have a raffle going on. So we are still searching for your Twitter posts with the most likes, because the first one we want to give for free, the conference ticket for 2020, and we have the 2 books, just a reminder. So hashtag Agile Austria Conference is to use, and at the end we will search for the one, actually for the 3 people who will try to win this raffle. Yes? No? I don't know what a Polaroid is, but with Instagram I can follow. No, we are not using currently Instagram here. Yeah, just Twitter. But you have a great technician next to it, so maybe you can ask him like how to download and install an app. Later this evening, yeah, we have, instead of like a classical panel discussion, we use a fishbowl format. It will be also new for me. Let's see. Still, the participating is in the like choosing, so it's a surprise fishbowl, right? So we don't really know, but the motto will be very clear. The motto will be, of course, the road of Agile, and there will be some of the organizing team, keynote speaker or good speakers. But the good thing as a fishbowl, if you think the guy is wrong, you just can go there and ask his opinion. Yeah, because I was like yesterday too slow, this time I'm too fast. I think it's fine because the next guy has something to speak. You already told me like it's not about you, and this is a decency I like about people. It's the message you want to send. So yes, I have like specification by example, like everything, but the story he told me was, yeah, well, you should tell something about me, like you burned like 5 billion, no, 5 million. 5 billion?
Not 5 billion. If I have 5 billion to burn, that would be amazing. We'd go have a party.
Yeah, okay.
Something people remember, yeah?
So you were the CTO, right?
5 million. I was the CTO of a company who burned £5 million doing software very, very efficiently. It was amazing. We had continuous delivery before. Continuous delivery was a buzzword. We had 100% test coverage. We had 1 week iterations. We had everything you can read about how to do kind of Agile properly. And then the company went bankrupt.
Well done, right?
Yeah,
well done, yeah.
We very efficiently went through that time. If we had a worse software development process, it would go slower.
Okay, I see, you wanna you get your spirit out. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give Gojko Adzic a hard welcome on stage.
No, microphone should be on, yeah?
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
So you have your own timer?
I have my own timer, yeah. Hello? Good, now we have the microphone. I just need to turn on the slides and then we're ready to start. So, but you could hear me before as well, I guess. The nice thing about being from Serbia is that we have microphones built in, so. Anyway, let's see how this looks. Come on. Okay, nice. So part of kind of what I want to talk about today, if we look at the road to Agile as a theme, is what is the road to a good product? And what do roadmaps look like? And what does a good roadmap look like? Because as I mentioned, we had this situation where it's probably one of the best technical teams I've ever worked with. We set it up properly from the start. Nobody could tell us, so, you can't do this or you must do this. And it's entirely our fault. But we had a process that was technically amazing where we just didn't build anything of value. And we built a lot of things. We spent a lot of money and just not valuable. And this really was a revelation for me because up until that point, which was 12 years ago, I was under the impression that as long as I do stuff technically well, things are just going to work out. And I realized that the road to a good product has very, very little to do with the technical practices that we kind of learn about and the process of developing software. And that's kind of part of the lesson that I want to give to you today and maybe help you avoid the same mistakes as we did, or maybe make them faster so that you don't end up ruining the company. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about impact mapping as a technique that I've learned after that, and it helped us quite a lot not to repeat that mistake. I'm currently working on a product where there's only 2 of us and we're competing with companies that have 200 or 300 people, and we're kind of not that bad actually in terms of competing with them. So I've kind of learned my lesson, and I'll be talking about impact mapping as a technique later, and talking about a bit of a research that I'm doing now on how other companies are doing impact mapping and what to do about it. So if you know about impact mapping already, then in the last part of my talk, you learn about how some interesting lessons I've learned from how other companies are doing that and maybe help you do impact mapping better. If you don't know about impact mapping at all, don't worry about that. There's 3 things I would like you to take away from today's talk that if you remember those 3 things, you will make your company 10 times more effective. So that's kind of the challenge I've set myself for this talk. So in terms of the road to Agile and iterative delivery and things like that, there's a couple of really interesting case studies that have been published in the last few years. One of the case studies that is fascinatingly interesting for me is the FBI Sentinel case study. Jerome Israel, who was the project lead on that, published this lengthy case study in IEEE Journal a few years ago, and it started making its way to books now, and expect to read a lot more about that in the books to come. By the way, I'll mention a lot of books, a lot of papers. I will send the organizers a list of all these things so they can send it to you. So the paper that Jerome Israel wrote is called Why FBI Cannot Deliver a Case Management System. And somewhere, I don't know, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, they realized that their key case management system for all the casework in FBI is still in COBOL, and most COBOL programmers are either dead or dying, and they need some kind of strategy for migration. So what they decided to do is, rewrite everything in Java, because of course Java is the solution to everything, and at least was 15 years ago. So what they did, what a government agency usually does like that, they published a request for proposals, and Lockheed Martin won with a bid of $90 million to replace this thing. And $90 million later, they realized that what FBI delivered, what Lockheed Martin delivered is just never going to be finished. It's impossible to finish it because it has too many problems, it just doesn't integrate, it's horrible, it's not going to work. But Lockheed Martin had really, really good lawyers. So the FBI had to kind of pay them the money, and then they were still left without this new system. So they thought they learned the lesson, and they realized that it's too risky to just go through $90 million and then figure out, is this good or bad? So they decided to kind of do it all over again, but they were going to do it iteratively, where every month FBI will have the opportunity to cancel the project if it's not going correctly. And every month, whoever is delivering will need to report what they've delivered, so FBI can make the decision. Somebody else won the bid. I think Lockheed Martin was disqualified after their brilliant success. And I don't remember who won the bid, but $360 million later, they realized it's never going to be delivered. It's just not going to be finished at this pace ever. They need to cancel it, but by that point, they've already approved it for about 4 years, and they've paid $360 million. And the big question was, why did it take 4 times more money to learn that something is just not going to work if you do it iteratively than it was with waterfall? Because it doesn't make any sense. And one of the lessons that Jerome had was that pretty much what they were measuring was wrong. Every month when they were coming to present what was delivered, they were presenting function points. They were talking about, we had to deliver 600 function points this month, we've delivered 590, or we've delivered 610, and things like that. And Jerome's big lesson was that function points, story points, and stuff like that, that most, if I look at the people I work with as a consultant, most teams today use some variant of story points or something like that to report on progress. Their conclusion was that if you have that, it's horribly misleading, and it's very, very dangerous, because those things are related to effort. They are related to the complexity of the work we deliver, not to the value we deliver. Story points are how complex something is, and usually that translates to how much capacity you have to deliver complexity multiplied by the time you have. And the reason why for $360 million this worked okay is that pretty much they were thinking about, well, we have 1 month to deliver this, we can deliver this much complexity, and then in a month they said, well, we've worked for a month. Oh, that's good, you worked for a month. Next month, there was a holiday, so we didn't really work for a whole month, we worked for, 3 weeks and 2 days. Well, yeah, that's okay, and every month they were working for a month. That's kind of what they were measuring, and that's why this was horribly misleading. So part of what I want to talk about is feedback, and how do we get feedback on our work? Because the promise of Agile was that we can iteratively get feedback on our work and then improve the process, but improve the product and figure out where we're going. But how do we get feedback? And this is where I think as an industry we are horribly, horribly, horribly bad. Because the way we're treating feedback is very intuitive. Almost no software teams I've worked with have a very kind of scientific approach to feedback, but feedback systems is something that has existed in science, and there was a lot of research done on that for the last 150 years. Feedback is not something intuitive, feedback is not something new. And we're ignoring 150 years of research in feedback systems. So I'm just going to bore you very quickly with some terminology before we can continue. In systems control, there's 2 types of systems control that people talk about. There's feedback and there's feed forward. Kind of nobody knows about feed forward, but There's feedback and feed forward. So feed forward is where you know exactly what's going to happen to the other system before you tweak it. And you're not really looking for any measurements out of it. You're just saying, you know, do this and it's going to be great. Feed forward is where people copy the Spotify model. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You don't really know. Feed forward is when people implement safe. You just kind of copy a template into your process, and then, you know, nobody knows. There's no measurement at the end. There's no feedback to how it's working. Feedback is where you kind of do something, you measure what happened, and then you take corrective actions based on the actual result. That's kind of the really interesting thing. So feedback versus feed forward is like this. When you go to a doctor and you don't feel good, and the doctor takes some measurements and says, oh, take this medicine, take 2 pills a day for the next 7 days, you're going to be better, that's feed forward. The doctor kind of knows what's going to happen. And the reason why the doctor knows that is that doctors have been killing people for 5,000 years. Oh, try this, maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not going to work, and then, you know, keeping stuff that works. So feed forward compared to feedback requires relatively complex models and really, really good knowledge about what's going to happen. Unless we have those models, unless we have 5,000 years of data how humans react to various poisons, this is witchcraft, it's not medicine. Feedback, on the other hand, doesn't require those complex models. Feedback says, oh, you know, I'm going to try something and see what the actual result is. The difference between feedback and forward in systems control is that feedback systems are a lot simpler. They don't require complicated models about what's going to happen, but feedback systems require change to the actual system. They require putting in some sensors, they require putting in measurement, they require putting in changes. Feed forward systems don't. So that's about that with terminology. And one of the 3 things that I want you to remember here is that feedback systems generally don't require upfront knowledge about what's going to happen. With the feedback system for cruise control, for example, you can tell the car, keep this at 60 kilometers per hour. The car does not need to know all the maps in the world. The car doesn't need to know what type of ground you're running on. The car doesn't need to know if you're going uphill or downhill. The car only needs to measure how quickly you're going, how quickly you want to go, and then speed up or slow down. But it needs to have really good measurements on what's going on. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So feedback systems are simpler to implement. They don't require upfront knowledge, but they require changes to the system. That's one of the things you really need to learn. The way software developers do feedback, or software teams do feedback, is we measure shit, we never really act on it properly. So we don't change the system. That's part of the problem. Now, kind of, one of the things that kind of feedback systems also rely on is measuring an important thing, measuring the right thing. Because if I'm measuring temperature outside, I'm not going to be able to adjust the temperature in this room. That doesn't make sense. And there was another really lovely case study, I will send you the link to this, where there was a project at the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, to personalize the video player. And after spending about £75 million on personalizing the video player, the project was shut down because it delivered no value. And because this is a kind of public company with publicly funded money, the UK National Audit Office got involved to figure out how can you possibly spend £75 million without delivering any value. And the conclusion was brilliant. You can read about this. The conclusion was that kind of you could do that because it was agile. And what agile meant is that, you know, they could make up the benefits as they went along. So every month, whatever was delivered was declared to be valuable. It's brilliant, you know, they avoided the problem of the FBI where they were not measuring effort, they were measuring value, but they were treating it by basically saying, well, you know, hey, we've done 5 buttons here, this was valuable, yeah? So they started with the idea of having, I don't know how many thousands of active users on the site, and then they changed it to be total users, and then they changed it to be signups, and it was changing all the time. So they could justify the budget they're spending. Now, this is a big problem because unless we're measuring the right thing, then anything can be valuable. And the big question is, when we start looking at software, how can we even figure out what is valuable? And how can we measure those things? Because generally, my experience, at least with teams, is that it's very, very easy to say if something was successful or not at the end. Or 6 months later. You know, you do this thing to increase sales. When you finish this whole project 6 months later, you can see if the sales increased or not. But that's not really helping us adjust the plan. It's not really helping us be flexible in terms of priorities. It's not really helping us figure out what we want to do. And measuring value in that way is really, really problematic. So there's another great book about this that talks about this whole problem in a lot more detail, not from a software perspective, from a project execution perspective. It's called 4 Disciplines of Execution. Lovely book, talks about this whole problem where most organizations, not just software organizations, kind of can tell if they delivered value a year or 2 after they finish the project. But that's not timely enough to adjust things. So this is another thing about feedback. Feedback has a very important time component. How quickly we can measure feedback, how quickly we can act on it, really controls what we can do about and how we can use feedback. If most people talk about feedback systems being, you know, always good, but feedback systems, if you look at the science of feedback, you know, they treat it as well. There's this negative sides that a feedback system, changing the system to incorporate feedback can introduce. One of the biggest negative things of feedback systems or unintended consequences is to introduce oscillations. Oscillations in a feedback system, for example, a trivial example of that is you put a human below a shower. You have a human influencing a shower using kind of the temperature switch. You have a shower influencing the human as well. You have a feedback loop. So if you have an accumulation boiler that holds temperature, that can conserve power, kind of you move this, it becomes hotter and it's okay. If you have a running boiler that has a delay in feedback, you move it to be a bit hotter, it's still not hotter, so you move it to be a bit hotter as well. It's still not hotter, you move it to be a bit hotter as well, it's still not hotter, and then 100 degrees comes down and says, ah! And then you kind of, you know, switch back to cold, but then it becomes too cold. Oscillations. Oscillation is in a software processor usually where, oh, our #1 priority today are premium users. And then tomorrow, no, that's not premium users, our #1 priority are free users. No. Now we work on multiple partners. Now we work on this. And kind of lots and lots of teams suffer from those oscillations quite a lot. That's caused by delays in feedback. So kind of one of the best things we can do technically, if you're from a technical side of things, you're not really in control of the product side of things, one of the best things you can do technically is speed up feedback. Speeding up feedback reduces oscillation. Speeding up feedback makes it easier to act on things. And the big question is, how do we speed up feedback to avoid this stuff? And how do we measure something that is valuable? And this is where we start running into 3 big illusions that software people tend to have about value. So the first big illusion that software people tend to have about value is that what a customer says they want is what they actually need. And I've run into this problem a million times. You know, we had this thing where we had a really important request from a key stakeholder to improve the performance of the database. And then we looked at the hot queries, we looked at all the database stats, we improved the performance of that, we released it. 2 weeks later, the request comes from the same person, improve the performance of the database. Then we look at the hot queries, we look at all this stuff, we improve the performance. 2 weeks later, improve the performance of the database. Like, well, what's going on here? It's probably, how much do you want us to improve it? Because we've looked at all this stuff, you know, we're now hitting the limits of hardware. We need more hardware, and then kind of we ended up telling the business analyst, we were still working with business analysts back then, like, okay, we need to have more information about this. We need to talk to this person to figure out what's going on. No, you can't talk to this person. He's, you know, an important business stakeholder. He doesn't talk to developers. And I worked with a lady that kind of was a bit cheeky, so in the corporate directory she found his phone number, called him and said, look, we've been trying to improve the performance of your database, but you know, something is obviously wrong. We've been trying to do this for a month and a half. We'd just like to talk to you a bit to see what's going on. He said, yeah, I've been trying to get this improved for 2 months. You know, it's done a bit, but not too much. And then we went and observed him, what he's doing, and actually it turns out he doesn't need to improve the performance of the database. He was doing something manually that we can just script up and give him a report. And what he was doing is opening up different parts of the hierarchy and copying and pasting numbers into Excel, so that he can add them up in Excel, because he likes Excel. And yes, we could improve the performance of each of these small things, but not too much, because we're hitting the limits of hardware. But instead of him doing hundreds of operations manually, we could just do and run one single report in a couple of minutes and give it to him. So what people ask for and what people need are very, very rarely the same. Another book that's really great to read about this is a book by Anthony Ulrich. Anthony was in charge of the second worst product launch in history. He wasted $500 million directly and $1.2 billion indirectly on doing exactly what the customers told him they want. He did a lot of focus groups, lots of user research. They compiled a list of requirements, and they built this machine called IBM PC Junior. There are entire deserts in the US now landfilled with those computers they didn't sell. And his big conclusion is, what people say they want and what people actually need are not the same. So the book he wrote is What Customers Want. Strongly recommend reading that, where he talks about, again, figuring out feedback and measuring the right things, because they were measuring the wrong things. So the second illusion that starts hitting software people quite a lot is that if somebody important asks for a feature, it's actually valuable. Usually in software teams, the importance of the value is proportional to the salary of the person asking for it. Oh, this person is a managing director of one of the clients, must, Well, no, because these people don't know about the technology, these people don't know about what's possible, what's not possible. They often have conflicting needs. The reason why we burnt so much money in the startup I mentioned is one of our key investors was a megalomaniac, and he was always talking about virality and things like that. So, we've done a lot of stuff about virality at the point where it made no sense. And we were trying to bring people to the website at the point where our customer retention, our stickiness was really, really bad. So we had this thing where, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but maybe from 10,000 people that come to the website, one of them ever comes back, because just the flow was wrong. And instead of focusing on improving the flow, we were focusing on improving how many people we bring to the website. And we spent a lot of time and money just wasting an opportunity. If we did the customer retention part first and then did the virality, the result would be completely different. But I didn't know that back then, and I didn't know how to kind of deal with these things, because I was approaching it purely from a technical perspective. Now, there's some interesting stats that were published about this in a paper called Online Experimentation at Microsoft, by a guy called Ron Kohavi. Ron went back to the PowerPoints that launched some grand initiatives, and a bit later tried to figure out whether the things that were promised in the PowerPoints actually came true. And one of his conclusions was, and you can read this in a paper, is that at Microsoft about 1/3 of ideas improved the metrics they were supposed to improve. About 1/3 of ideas that he studied do not have any statistically significant impact on the measurements they were supposed to improve. And about 1/3 of the initiatives they studied actually negatively impacted the stuff they were supposed to improve. So in the paper, he also quotes Amazon, that is apparently the best in the industry in terms of getting value for features. And he says that the success rate at Amazon is slightly below 50%. Now, Microsoft is not a bad software development company. They're one of the better ones. So statistically, if you and your team are anywhere between good and great, Microsoft and Amazon, between 2/3 and 1/2 of the stuff you have in the backlog now are bad ideas. Between 2/3 and 1/2 of the stuff you delivered last year were bad ideas, statistically. I mean, statistics, of course, don't work on outliers. Maybe your business people are so much better than Amazon's that you are, better than a half and significantly better. But statistically, looking at, 200 people in a room, probably, we should be deleting about half of the software we deliver. And the big question for you now, I guess, is looking at just counting the stories you delivered last year, how many of them have you removed from production after they were delivered? And for most people, the answer is going to be 0. Now, the question is, why are you paying 3 times as much for testing your software than you should? Why are you keeping regression testing features that are delivering no value? Why are we continuing with this stuff and continue delivering stuff that doesn't deliver value, keeping to work on it? How quickly can we spot and stop this? So this is again the speed of feedback. If we are not the ones deciding on this, can we give better information to people deciding on this stuff so they can stop us working on pointless stuff earlier? And that's one of the key questions that we need to start asking ourselves. Now, the third illusion that kind of causes problems for this is that we're any good at estimating value of what we need to do. And that's the problem, because people throw around, oh, this is going to make millions, and then it doesn't make any money. Or this is not that important, and it actually turns out to be fantastically important. And for example, we had this, with the collaboration product I'm building now, we had this really, really weird episode where we got an angry email from one of the university admins with lots of expletives and, mentioning my mother and a dog in a really weird position and things like that. And he was blaming us for sending him 800 emails overnight and telling us we have to stop doing that. And the really interesting part of that is that our software at that point had no email sending functionality. So I, tried to reply and said, well, we don't send out emails. This is, something you probably want to complain to somebody else about. And then he sent me another email with lots of expletives and swearing with a screenshot of his inbox. And his inbox was full of, you could see a list of emails with all the same subject. And one of those things was in focus in the next pane. And there was our logo on it. It was like, oh, fuck. Something unexpected happened here. Now, what had happened is we were trying to become number 2 in the school market, in the especially universities and high schools in the US, because we saw there's a big opportunity there. Other people are not competing there that much. We cannot become number 1, but we could become number 2. And we've done a lot of features to integrate with Google Drive and the G Suite for education ecosystem, because that's what they're selling there. And as a result of that, our usage started going up. And usually what happens when a user wants to use Google Drive is you go and say, I'd like to save to Google Drive. Google pops up a dialog saying this application would like to access your Google Drive, yes or no. You say yes, the dialog goes away, our app gets access to that. Not at this university. In this university, this guy set it up so that when an application says, this application would like to access Google Drive, yes or no, a student says yes, an administrator gets an email saying this student would like to allow this application to access Google Drive, yes or no. And one of the teachers there that was running a popular online course mentioned our application in a course, suggested people use it for homework. 800 people wanted to use it for homework. He got 800 emails. Now, I explained at this point, look, it's not up to us, it's Google sending you these emails. We don't have email sending function. I said, no, it's your stupid app, because for all the other apps, I can set up a group approval. For you, I cannot, the button is grayed out. So I didn't even know what group approval meant. So I was reading about this in the documentation. So on page number 3 of setting up your Google Drive integration, there is a checkbox that says allow administrators to install this thing to the whole domain. Tick. Now, how valuable is a tick? Usually we associate value to effort. Like this was like, a second job, maybe 10 minutes of research, and we had all these other features that, we've been working for 3 months. We have 6 more months of features to do about this. Now, after that tick, because Google kind of doesn't have group approvals, they implemented that as a response to kind of all the other apps complaining about emails. What that tick actually does is it actually installs our application on all the students of that university, not just the ones that asked about this, but everybody. So people kind of open their Chromebook, they see a new application to try it out, and it turns out it's not just this guy that had this problem. Lots of other people had this problem, just didn't complain because it wasn't that bad. But the next time 5 students ask for something at some university, instead of approving it manually, the admin says install, 10,000 people get our app. Usage stats, you can see this growing. Because that tick box did more for us than 9 months of development. And, you know, if I just look at the value of that, it's insane, but it's, you know, did I know that up front? No. And kind of we threw away kind of about 3 months of future plans because we saw this is okay now, it's growing, you know, we can do something else. So, you know, we're really, really bad at estimating value. People say this is going to be the best thing in the world, it actually delivers nothing. Or, you know, this is not that important, it delivers the world. And this is because we do not have good models for feed forward. That's the problem. I don't know what's going to happen when I tick that box. I have an assumption, but that assumption might be wrong. We don't have good models, and this is something that people have been studying for a long time. There's a book by Tim Harford called Adapt that talks about why linear plans fail in economy, in military, in civil engineering, in lots of other kind of areas, why linear plans fail. And he says the linear plans fail because usually there are 3 things that even the best experts cannot control. So we cannot have a good model for this because we don't control it. When you put medicines into a human body is relatively self-contained. You kind of know what's going to happen. There are some variations, but it is within kind of the Gauss normal distribution. Where with kind of working with large-scale human systems, societies, large groups of users, we don't control these things, so we can't have good models, actually. There's nothing we can do to have good models. And he talks about there's at least 3 dimensions that even the best experts cannot predict. The first one is locality, where things that work perfectly well in something we know, a locality, say, Austria, or a locality, say, desktop computers, will not necessarily work the same when we translate it to another locality, for example, Russia, or when we migrate a desktop app to mobile. People use it differently. Unless we already have good data about that, we really don't know what's going to happen. I worked with a financial services institution that had really, really great success in the Nordics. They made a lot of money. They deployed their credit algorithms to Russia, lost a ton of money next year and pulled out. People behave differently. With this kind of collaboration tool I'm building, we had this really weird report one day with somebody from we were looking at end-user error reporting. We have really good end-user error reporting in the browser and on client device, and we saw after a particular race a spike in errors coming from Spain and Mexico. The software is not localized, so there's no reason for a territory to have a spike in errors. So we got in touch with a few users that had this error and said, look, you know, we saw you having problems, what's going on? And one of the users replied saying, oh, when I click on the button to publish now, you know, just nothing happens. And it's like, send us a screenshot. And he sent me a screenshot of our application in Spanish. It's like, we don't have an application in Spanish. And what is this? Is somebody scamming us? Is somebody pretending to be us? We looked at the URL, it looks like us. And actually what he did is he used Google Translate to translate the user interface in Spanish. Because Spanish has an opening and an ending question mark, and the opening question mark is this weird Unicode thing, and we were using labels on buttons inside the code. This thing broke everything. We didn't know about, now I know about that, I didn't. You know, I get surprised. The other thing, you know, he's talking about is time. Time is something that, you know, we generally cannot control. Stuff might be really, really good idea now, 6 months later it's no longer a good idea. Or it might be a brilliant idea now, but 6 months later or a year later, not that important. And unless we know about this and unless we shorten the feedback loop, it's really difficult to know about these things. And the last one that Hartford talks about is humans, because he says humans are essentially unpredictable. You know, you tell them to do one thing, they do another. They find brilliant ways of abusing your software, like translating to Spanish using Google Translate, or, you know, using it. We had one error report from this lady who says the application works brilliantly when I use it on my computer, but it doesn't work that well when I use it on my Samsung fridge. Like, what? I didn't even know you could run kind of applications on a Samsung fridge, and why would you even want to do mind mapping on a Samsung fridge? That doesn't matter. People find ways of abusing the app. You know, Anyway, so what Hartford talked about is essentially feed forward versus feedback. And if we don't have good models about this, feed forward doesn't work. Feedback works because then we don't have to have good models. And he came up with 3 aspects of good roadmaps, 3 aspects of good plans that will help us not just survive when something unexpected happens, but actually be much better than the competition. The bad news with these things is that unless your business people, unless your product managers, unless your customers are perfectly clairvoyant and they can see the future, they can control the time, they can control humans and brainwash them and mind control them, they will be surprised by these 3 things. That's why at Microsoft only 1/3 of initiatives move the numbers where they're supposed to move them. But the good news is that all your competitors suffer from the same problem. So if we can figure out better ways of handling this, we can run circles around the competition. That's why, now in a team of 2 people, we compete with companies with 200 or 300 employees. Because we can control this thing better, they can't. So Hartford comes up with 3 attributes that a plan needs to have to be able to survive this stuff. The first attribute is variation. What he says that we really don't know what's going to work out, what's not going to work out, so plans need to have more variation than what we're just going to deliver. Usually software plans have like the minimum, this is the minimum we need to deliver. Hartford talks about exactly the opposite. Put stuff in your plan knowing that you will never deliver it. Put options there so that when something unexpected changes, we already have an option to go in. So that replanning is not expensive. So let's have more stuff than what we'll just deliver. Knowing really well that maybe 10% of this thing will go live or 30% of this thing will go live. The other dimension he talks about is survivability, where if we know that some of these things will turn out to be bad ideas, all of them need to be relatively small so they don't kill us if they turn out to be bad ideas, because any of them really can turn out to be a bad idea. So variation was never really a problem for software teams. I think most teams usually get more requirements and then we need to kind of slim it down. Survivability were a lot better. As kind of 20 years ago, people were doing these 2-year projects, 1-year projects. Now we have user stories that can fit into 2 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. So it's more survivable. Kind of it's the third principle that we really have a problem with, and this is selection. Selection not as in prioritization, selection as in evolutionary selection. What do we keep and what do we kill after we've tried it out? How do we measure, how do we know what worked and what didn't work? But do that at a time where we can still influence the project, not 2 years later. Not when we spend £75 million and then the National Audit Office gets involved. Much earlier. As we're delivering, how do we select what to keep, what to keep pursuing? What's a bad idea, what should we kill? So I think we're really bad at this, and this is where, if you look at kind of how software people manage roadmaps, we now have a terminology why this thing is a bad idea. The font is intentionally small, don't even bother reading it, but I assume everybody's seen one of these or has one of these on their Jira system. It's like an endless list of, as a user, blah, 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 who knows what. How do we, there's no variation here. This is all, we're going to deliver this at some point. It's the minimum marketable thing, yeah? Okay, they are survivable, but there's very little to tell us what the selection criteria is, what is useful there, how do we manage roadmaps. So a roadmap like this is horrible, and Hartford talks about this from a perspective of a linear plan. Linear plans, as in everything is on the same level, and in this case, features and epics and stories, they're all on the same level, they're deliverable. They really make it difficult to replan. What Hartford talks about is how good roadmaps typically look like this. The trick is in the name. It's a map of roads. If I want to go from here to here, there's multiple options. I can take this bridge or this bridge or this bridge. If one of them is blocked, it's not the end of the world. I can just take another one. I know what the options are. If I want to go from here to here, then, I can... all of these streets are relatively small. So if one of them is, there's a Red Bull thing today blocking half the city, that's okay. We can take some other streets. Tomorrow, it's going to be unblocked. So there's a time component to this we can take into as well. But the problem with this is that up until maybe 15 years ago, the way we're doing selection on these things was really problematic. Replanning was expensive. As you know, we were using these things. Usually, we'd have to chart out everything from start to finish on a map. And then, because I never learned how to drive, my wife would drive and I would be there flipping the book, and then 5 minutes later we're in a situation where we start blaming somebody, you know, who's a moron for not knowing how to read, or who has the reflexes of a dead horse and missed a turn and things like that. And then, you know, we have to stop and figure out where are we. And that was expensive because you have to find a landmark, or you have to find a petrol pump and then ask them where you are on the map, and then replan the whole thing again. Replanning was expensive. About 15 years ago, we bought a marriage-saving device that looks like this, so nobody needs to be a moron anymore. This made replanning cheap. It made replanning fast. It can locate me on the map, and it can do survivability for us, but it can also do selection. That's kind of the key thing. The key thing that the GPS brought compared to a map is this thing here. It tells us what the next turn is, and if we miss the next turn, it's not a problem, it will replan automatically. That's what we need to do for our software. And the big question is, how do we do that, and where do we then relate to the plan? So the second important thing I want you to remember, if you can remember only 3 things from today, is that linear plans don't work. Linear plans don't give us the context for replanning quickly, because we need to have the streets, but we also need to have the turn-by-turn navigation. We also need to have the GPS positioning, where do we want to go. They all depend on each other. So with the software process, usually kind of a hierarchical backlog works much better. So any kind of hierarchy is going to be better than a linear plan. I like to use hierarchies between a business goal, that's something we can measure on a yearly cycle, or 2 years or 6 months, like improve sales. But then we need to have the turn-by-turn navigation. We need to have something that we can measure quickly so that we can still impact the plan. We need to have selection, kind of, you know, what kind of smaller business change needs to happen for that. And then we can have all the software change ideas and things like that. So the big question is, what do we put in the blue line here? What is the thing that we can measure short term that's value, not effort? Because we can measure effort here easily. And what is, you know, what can we measure that is visible or observable maybe a day or a week after we delivered something? Well, we can still influence the plan. So 4 disciplines of execution talks about 2 potential metrics there. One is ticking off a critical task. Say if you need to get regulatory approval to launch something, getting the regulatory approval is obviously good. It's binary. Critical task, yes or no. Those things are relatively rare. In my experience, maybe less than 1% of the stuff we need to do. Maybe for your context, it's going to be different. The second metric they talk about in 4 disciplines of execution that's a lot more common is behavior changes. Behavior changes in terms of, I do this, people observe this thing more, or click on this thing more, or engage with us more. That's something we can measure on a shorter time scale. That's something we can observe, we can measure, we can evaluate. And if you can remember the third thing from today, remember that behavior changes are potentially valuable. That's how we can do stuff on a shorter time scale. There's a lovely example of this from Google. You can find details on that if you search for 40 shades of blue. And I'll send you some links about this. At kind of somewhere, I think about 10 years ago at Google, the head of design, a guy called Doug Bowman, wanted to change the color of the links on the homepage. And he had this idea that, you know, this is going to be the best color in the world, it's going to be amazing, it's going to be great. And the developers asked him, well, how do we test that this is right? How do we test we've done it correctly? He said, well, I would look at the CSS value for this color. You know, that's okay, that's just saying that what somebody important head of design says is valuable, but how do you measure that? I said, well, why do you know this is, you know, why do you claim this is more valuable? He says, well, this is, you know, the color theory says this color is a lot more noticeable, blah, blah, blah. Most organizations stop at this point. Somebody had a good excuse. Head of design says this color is more noticeable. Now, the developers there knew about this trick, so they asked him, well, you know, what's the behavior change if this color is more noticeable? How do we measure something that is not a measurement of a solution, but a measurement that we solve the problem? And Doug said, well, you know, people will click more on this link. Now we have a behavior change, click more. And They rolled out his color, they rolled out 30 other colors that night to prove him wrong. And they measured it, and they proved that his color was performing worse than kind of the color he suggested. Actually, you know, extrapolating data from that, they proved that his color would lose Google about $250 million a year. Now, how valuable is like a, you know, a CSS change plus some testing? I don't know, you know, minus $250 million. But they were able to provide this data because they were measuring behavior changes. So if you can't remember 3 things, you can remember only 1 thing from today, remember this one. It's so important. For any user story you get, look at the change in somebody's behavior. Most user stories don't describe a change. Most user stories describe a behavior. As a trader, in order to trade equities, I want this thing here. Trading equities is a behavior. Ask, what change do you expect to see here? Trading equities more frequently, trading equities more successfully, trading equities more profitably, trading equities less risky. Some change, because a behavior change is observable on a shorter time scale. And then we can say, if we can't even cause this thing to go in this direction, it's probably not worth continuing with this feature. It's just not going okay. It's a GPS telling you you've not made the next turn. So, kind of, the thing here is how, you know, visualizing this stuff becomes really interesting as a hierarchical backlog, and impact maps are a visualization of that. Impact maps are a hierarchical backlog where we look at deliverables, we connect deliverables to behavior changes they're supposed to cause in a user community. Then we look at different categories of users whose behavior they were supposed to change, and then we link that to business goals. And impact maps are a very nice way of creating hierarchical backlogs that allow us to create a roadmap, multiple roads, with lots of options that we can use to replan quickly. We can measure success on each level. I can deliver better pagination. I can see if people are viewing more ads. If yes, then this was useful. If not, either this spec was wrong, or something was wrong, or people are behaving differently, or there's a local problem, there's a time-based problem, there's a human problem. We can revisit this, we can throw it away, we can improve it. I can deliver better pagination so people view more ads, and if people view more ads and we're growing mobile advertising, this was worth doing. If we're not growing mobile advertising, then kind of it's not worth doing. It's not contributing to the business goal. And then we can kind of visualize assumptions, we can measure these things, and impact maps are kind of wonderfully simple. I can explain an impact map in 3 minutes, people intuitively get this, you know, we can start creating better plans. And I wrote a book on impact mapping in 2011. It was a very tiny book, it's simple, and lots of people got enthusiastic about this. Last year, a friend of mine from Vienna, Christian Hasse, and I started interviewing organizations about how they actually do this stuff, and you know what benefit they got and practices they got, and we realized that simple really is not easy. There's a big difference there. So I can explain this thing in 3 minutes, but people actually getting value out of this and using it in different contexts becomes quite difficult. So we kind of listed a bunch of difficulties that people had and solutions that they had there. So if you tried impact mapping and kind of you got stuck, here's a couple of quick ideas that we learned. And this is an ongoing research. I can't really give you all the names and full numbers yet because we're still waiting on approval, but we'll publish this thing in a book probably kind of early next year. So we realized there's 4 different contexts when people are doing this stuff. And these 4 different contexts require different ways of facilitating impact mapping, different data you collect, different structure, different rigidity in numbers and things like that. And knowing what context you are in and what people do might make a big difference between, you know, a stakeholder session where everybody says we wasted a lot of time and a stakeholder session where somebody said, oh, this is brilliant. So the first context is focusing delivery, where people kind of know the objectives, but there's too many objectives. There's too many things people want to achieve. It's maybe unclear how to get there. And in this context, there's a couple of kind of key things we've learned. One of the things is that getting an upfront full agreement on one goal people want to achieve next is really, really important. Getting stakeholders to say, yes, this is kind of the thing we want to select. We've interviewed a government organization that's a tax authority on kind of, they were doing this artificial intelligence system with machine learning that's going to be amazing. It's going to save, I don't know how many millions of I can't tell you the currency because then you know which one it is. We still don't have the permission to publish that. But kind of they had too many goals they wanted to achieve. And after figuring out like what is really the one goal we want to achieve here, and then doing an impact mapping session, they were able to finish their work about a year and a half earlier, and they were able to achieve 10 times more value than they expected, because they kind of really zeroed in and focused on this. So in this context, stakeholders and delivery team members need to create a map together. We had lots of kind of situations where people failed because the developers were creating the map on their own, and then kind of trying to communicate it to stakeholders who didn't really agree with that, or stakeholders creating a map on their own and kind of not communicating it to anybody. Capturing kind of low-level deliverables at this point is pretty much pointless. Low-level stories, stuff that's kind of, below a month of work, don't worry about that. You kind of, people want a big picture to see there. So maybe just kind of high-level epics. But what's really, really important there is to assign measurements to behavior changes. Assign measurements to impacts, because that will allow us to track things as we go. Another case study we heard here is a big US government agency where they were running this project that was, they spent about a year and a half just collecting requirements. And Mark Schwartz wrote about this in his book, The Art of Business Value, actually. Says when he took over the project, he looked at a year and a half worth of work, called in all the project managers and said, this is really brilliant, and then threw it into the trash can. And people started panicking. And then he got them to actually figure out, well, what impacts do we want to achieve, what metrics do we want to do? And one of the things they wanted to create is allow a caseworker to process more cases per day. So they published this number publicly. They had it in the developers room, they had it in kind of all the business rooms, and as they were improving the software, they were always looking at, is this number moving or not? And as a result of that, they actually finished the whole thing. They achieved full operational readiness. That's how the US government calls deploying something to production properly, and finishing with that 2 years earlier than people expected. Reviewing impact mapping, reviewing those metrics frequently, and then using that to decide, is this good, is this bad, becomes really, really important. I'll give you a couple of bonus tips in this situation. The first is, get people to write the goal individually and then compare. Lots of people got really surprised. You have 10 different stakeholders, get them to write down what they think the most important thing is, and then turn it over at the same time. If they see 20 different goals, that opens up negotiation before you even get into what you want to deliver technically. The second thing is, and this comes directly from 4 disciplines of execution, is create a team scoreboard. Create a data board for the team when they're delivering that doesn't get published to the stakeholders. So the team can kind of figure out what to do, where they can be more free to kind of experiment and look at these things. The second context that kind of teams use this in is reframing the problem, where objectives are kind of unclear or they're not really shared. Usually people come up with a solution. This is third-party development usually, here's 300 pages of stuff we want you to deliver. And in this case, instead of a whole room of people creating an impact map, it turns out that it's actually better if a single person goes and talks to lots of different people to collect information. We heard one interesting case about this from a city government in New Zealand, where there was a big earthquake, almost destroyed the city. And they were going to do this brilliant information system to help coordinate the repairs. It's going to have machine learning, it's going to have geoinformation, it's going to have all this brilliant stuff. And their estimate was that they're going to save about 2.4 million in repair costs if they coordinate this thing well. Because what started happening is, somebody comes and repairs the water pipes, and then another crew comes to fix up the cabling, and then they dig the whole thing up again, disrupt the water pipes, so people have to kind of do the water pipes again. And there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. There was actually a fight where one contractor had to deliver something by the end of the month, and they came to work and they found a big crane in the middle of the street they had to work on, so they were fighting with these other people to get them to move physically. So insane. By a guy we spoke with, they interviewed lots of different stakeholders, figured out what they think they should do, compared things, reported back to them in smaller groups through several meetings, and as a result of that, they concluded what they need to do is a better shared calendar. Not this artificial intelligence, not this, machine learning thing, just a shared calendar. And they did a shared calendar. As a result of that, they saved $20 million. They expected to save 2.4, and they delivered significantly sooner. So capturing the metrics not on the detailed impacts, but capturing metrics on the goals, like how much, what, and things like that is important for this case. And a bonus tip I can give you here is if you start doing an impact map, lots of people get stuck in terms of they do a goal and they do a bunch of actors who can help, who can obstruct, and things like that. People usually get stuck on that level. One organization we spoke with said, oh, we can petition the government to change the laws. Well, good luck with that. Yes, you could, but it's probably not going to work. So skip the second level of an impact map. Skip impacts, skip actors, look at the impacts, and let the actors emerge there. That you will do that much faster. So the third kind of category where we kind of heard people doing this is to set the vision for a product, where there's a prescribed solution, there's no objectives, and in that case, getting people to agree on a goal is going to be difficult, but get people to agree on a goal draft is interesting. So what we've usually heard here is somebody prepares an option for a goal and then sends it to people like, do you agree with this, rather than organizing a workshop on goal setting. In cases like this, engaging the delivery part of the organization, engaging the team to work on a map is probably too early. Key stakeholders usually just map together, and I would suggest avoiding deliverables altogether here. Just map out to the impacts. We usually we heard a couple of situations here where a third-party organization is ordering software from a delivery organization. So a contractor situation or a kind of external delivery. And a couple of times, what people did is met up with stakeholders. Oh, you have this delivery list of 500 items. Let's try and map out the impacts. We'll propose deliverables later. If you're working on an internal delivery situation, then this split is really, really interesting. Get the business people to propose impacts, but then developers or technical people to propose features that will meet those impacts. That's how you complete this thing. Usually, people don't keep the map after this. They create a vision document or an RFP or something like that, and then come up with deliverables later is a good tip. As an extra bonus tip in this situation, we heard from several organizations where showing a generic impact map to stakeholders who've never seen an impact map just doesn't work. Showing an example I showed you now, people just get confused. Try to come up with a map for something that looks similar to the problem they're working on. It doesn't need to be that exactly, but something similar on their domain, show it up front, and then people will much, much faster get into creating a map. And the last category that we heard people using impact maps for is changing a business. I have the most uncertainty about this one. These other three, we collected lots and lots and lots of case studies. This one, we only collected 3. So I'm not claiming any statistical relevance here, but it's an interesting emerging pattern. We're still interviewing organizations. And this is usually the case where an organization such as consultancy used impact mapping to improve a product, but then they realized, okay, we want to change some kind of process internally. Let's use impact mapping to clarify that as well. It's people are trying to find new objectives usually with this. And one example of that was a consultancy where they wanted to start a agile business analysis service. They realized lots of their customers need a product owner on demand or a business analyst on demand. They wanted to offer that as a service. They didn't really know what the objectives are with that. It's hey, we want to do this stuff. And in that case, the pattern that seems to be emerging is that the group that's actually going to be working on this, the Agile business analysts, they create an impact map, they propose it to the stakeholders, like this is our plan. The stakeholders usually review it offline and agree or disagree, and this is more to just inform the stakeholders what's going on rather than fully engage them in deciding on the plan. And this map needs to contain detailed action items. These are almost like a project plan where people tick off different things. As I said, this is the one we have least data about, but one of the key things that we heard is that people often wanted to add some extra stuff like culture or environmental constraints, and sometimes, I've heard this for other projects, other types of maps as well. If you've used impact mapping before and you found them very strict, remember that impact mapping is a visualization, a conversation technique, nothing more. It's there to help us show our assumptions and show the roadmap. So if you want to put other stuff there, just put it. Figure out a way, it's not supposed to be a UML diagram that's mathematically correct. Just put other stuff there, put notes, and put any constraints you want there. So that's pretty much it. I hope I've tickled your imagination at least a bit. I said, if you remember one thing from today, remember that behavior changes are potentially valuable. And the next time you get a user story, the next time you get a kind of deliverable to do, try and figure out what is the behavior change, what are the behavior changes there, so you can measure if this thing is actually happening or not. And so that you can shorten the feedback and report it back. We're still compiling data about this. If you have an interesting case study about impact mapping in your organization, please get in touch. If you just want to know when the book comes out, you can also sign up there, and then we'll start sending out stuff about this when it starts coming together. I expect the book to realistically come out maybe mid next year. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions to our speaker?
A question over there.
Okay.
For measuring data value. You have any good practices for measuring value? Any numbers you can recommend?
What do you mean by numbers?
Page views, whatever.
So measure behavior change. Change is important. Page views are a number, but figuring out, okay, when we do this thing, people will view more pages. Then, how much more is more? A nice thing about the behavior change is you can ask how much more until it's valuable. Because if you get 2 more pages next week viewed, is that good or is that horribly bad? If you get 5,000, is that too much? Is that what you expected? So discuss behavior changes up front and then measure those things. From a technical perspective, that's the best thing we can technically do. Give people who are making decisions better information so they can make it. So if somebody says, okay, we expect people to view more pages, how much more is more? Measure it. Report back. If you are in control of that, then giving people a behavior change instead of giving people just, page views is important. So that's my suggestion. Look at the behavior changes, look at whose behavior is changing, and then try to measure that and observe that. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
Okay.
Maybe there's some magic factors you found out to be really bad.
So there's a lovely book, it's a longer topic, there's a lovely book about this, it's called Lean Analytics. Lean Analytics actually has numbers from companies like Dropbox and Amazon and things like this, as they were growing through different stages. They talk about 5 different stages of growth of good products and what to measure in what stage. It's a slightly longer topic than I have time now, but Lean Analytics is a great reference for that. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, you were so astonishing.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. I think you all know what's next. It's the break and enjoying the second day of the conference. So see you around.